The last 2 years for Helluva Boss have been bad. It's not something we need to pretend isn't true, literally everyone in the indie animation community knows it. Helluva Boss Season 2 has been such a disaster that what used to be the most popular indie animated series of all time is now something that people take more joy in insulting than actually watching. Normally I would say that is completely unreasonable, but there is a point when something is so bad that making fun of it is the most respectful thing you can do for a show that you used to enjoy, because if you do criticize it seriously, it's almost redundant because everyone already knows how terrible said thing is. Unfortunately, I am not that kind of person. I enjoy genuine and passionate criticism of things I subject myself to, and Helluva Boss, a series that at one point in my life was one of the only things I had to look forward to and would rewatch episodes daily because of how much I enjoyed them, is no exception. The problem here is that the Season 2 finale, Sinsmas, is one of those episodes that is so bad that making fun of it for how bad it is, as opposed to analyzing why it's so bad, is a form of mercy. But like I said, unfortunately for Helluva Boss, I am not that kind of person. I'm going to go over a summary of the events that happened within this finale, so if you want to get right to the review, skip to the time displayed on screen. The finale begins with Stolas waking up in Blitz's apartment. They share breakfast together, but Stolas realizes that he really needs to talk to Octavia and tries to call her. Octavia sees that Stolas is trying to call her, but Stella prohibits Octavia from talking to him. Stolas then becomes distressed, and Blitz tries to help him take his mind off things by bringing him out shopping, and we get a montage of the two going about their day. A time skip of a month happens, with Stolas continually trying to call Octavia, who now hates Stolas because she believes that Stolas chose Blitz over her, and finds some of his old antidepressants. Meanwhile, back at Blitz's apartment, he is celebrating Sinsmas, which is a holiday for imps where everyone celebrates their favorite sin by indulging in whatever that sin represents, and seemingly Blitz and the rest of IMP are celebrating wrath. Blitz brings Stolas back to the office to be trained in becoming IMP's new secretary, and they get a job from a client who wants her husband who cheated on her assassinated. Blitz and the rest of the crew travel to Earth where Christmas is being celebrated, but once Blitz finds out the husband is enjoying his Christmas with his daughters and the man who he cheated on his wife with, he can't help but compare that family to the one he wants for himself and Stolas, and decides not to take the job. Luna and Moxie support his decision, but Millie is against it, as killing is in the spirit of Sinsmas, and that this job is no different than any other they have had in the past, but Blitz is stern with his decision and disregards her opinion. Moxie tries to comfort Millie, but she snaps at him for supporting Blitz's decision, but quickly apologizes as she says that she's not feeling herself today. Before the crew returns to the office, Stolas can't handle not seeing Octavia, and the realization of the magnitude of the decision he made back in Mastermind finally hits him, sending him into a blind rage as he goes to visit Octavia no matter the consequences. Once Blitz and the gang arrive back at the office, Octavia visits trying to return the antidepressant she found, but everyone is confused as they can't find Stolas, which leads to Octavia making an educated guess that he's back at his old mansion looking for her. As Stolas arrives to his old home, he confronts Androlphus demanding to see his daughter, which only results in Androlphus mocking him, leading to Stolas attacking him, beginning a fight between the two that Stolas can't win. Before Androlphus kills Stolas, IMP arrives to save him, leading to a giant battle between Androlphus, who conjures a Hydra, and the rest of IMP, ending with IMP overwhelmed, but before they are killed, Octavia arrives and uses her powers to destroy the Hydra. Androlphus threatens to tell Stella about Octavia's disobedience, but Blitz makes the point that in doing so, he would be admitting that he was defeated by a trio of imps and a hellhound, which would be a bad look. Androlphus backs down, threatening to have his revenge, and Stolas goes to reunite with Octavia, who calls him out for choosing Blitz over her. Stolas tries to explain himself, but only makes himself look worse, as Octavia believes that she was the reason that Stolas needed to take the antidepressants, and leaves Stolas behind as she leaves to rejoin Stella and Androlphus. Stolas is devastated, and the crew goes back to Blitz's apartment to celebrate Sinsmas, but Millie is distressed as she leaves the apartment to call Sally Mae, telling her that she's pregnant. Meanwhile, Stolas is out on the balcony as Blitz tries to comfort him about what happened with Octavia, but Stolas remains dejected. Luna calls Blitz back inside to celebrate, but before he does, he dances on the balcony with Stolas, and they are about to kiss, but instead, Blitz gives Stolas a hug that Stolas doesn't return, ending the episode. Helluva Boss Season 2 has been no stranger to the term character assassination, be it Stryker in Western Energy or Moxie in Unhappy Campers. This show over the last 2 years has been struggling with keeping its characters consistent, and this episode doesn't only repeat that mistake, but does so to such a damning magnitude that I don't think I can take some of these characters seriously ever again. Stolas in this episode is not Stolas. He may look like Stolas, he may sound like Stolas, but the way he acts is not Stolas. Throughout the entire second season of Hell of a Boss, Stolas has had one primary focus: Blitz. He has been trying to prove so desperately to Blitz that he does love him and that he is not the condescending classist prince that Blitz thinks him to be. Those have been his two motivations: to prove he loves Blitz and to prove that he's not just stuck-up royalty. Sinsmas not only abandons these character motivations, but it completely destroys them. Remember how in Apology Tour Stolas said that Blitz thinks he's a prince who thinks he's better than him? Well, Sinsmas proves that Blitz was completely right. Blitz cooks breakfast for Stolas, only for him to call it off-putting and then monologues about how high-end his usual meals are. He insults Blitz's holiday by indirectly calling it fun only for people who can't afford nice things. He looks down on Blitz for spending his holiday at work, and he cries over not having money. Stolas is far from perfect throughout this series. He's had plenty of moments of insensitivity towards Blitz, but I don't think there has been an episode in all of Hell of a Boss where Stolas has acted so insufferably spoiled towards the person who he not only claims to love, but is making him food, taking him shopping, fighting on his behalf, and is the only reason Stolas isn't living on the streets. The way Stolas acts towards Blitz in this episode completely contradicts and invalidates his entire arc throughout season 2 of him trying to prove himself to be a better person, resulting in every episode where he cares for Blitz, where he tries to be understanding of Blitz, and where he claimed to love Blitz, becoming nothing more than a farce once he reveals who he truly is once he has Blitz. Everything Blitz thought Stolas was throughout the series turned out to be true, resulting in the second most important arc of season 2 that took up so much runtime to all be for nothing. And that's only the half of it, as another core part of Stolas' development has been him falling in love with Blitz, and Sinsmas even proves that to be a lie. Remember when Blitz claimed not once, but twice throughout season 2 that Stolas' obsession with him was nothing more than a fetishistic fantasy?
I mean, Stolas is just a loud, thirsty bitch who loves feeling the thrill of getting dicked by the lower class. It's a novelty to him. Oh, come on, Stolas, you can't tell me this isn't a fantasy of yours.
Well, guess what phrase Stolas uses in this episode?
And I did it for what? These stupid, foolish fantasies!
Yes, you heard that right. Stolas just admitted, clear as day, that his romance with Blitz was nothing more than stupid, foolish fantasies. Now, I always give credit where credit is due, and I want to emphasize that Stolas' rage scene is probably one of the funniest non-sex related scenes in the whole series, but I can never fully enjoy it when he uses terminology that is so devastating to who Stolas is narratively and as a character. Now, I know some people might claim that Stolas said this in the heat of the moment and didn't actually mean it, but even if that is true, if I can't take what the characters in this show are saying seriously when they are being emotional, then why should I take what any character says seriously when they are showing emotion? There is no reason that Stolas' outrage should be made an exception to not be taken seriously, as opposed to when Stolas and Blitz argue in Full Moon, or when Blitz talks to Verostica in Apology Tour. If the writers don't expect me to take something a character says seriously during one of the most emotionally fragile points in their life, then don't write it in the first place. Anyway, as I have already established, Stolas has had two things going for him in season 2. Him proving not to be a stuck-up prince, which is what he ends up becoming anyway, and his love for Blitz, which he himself called a fantasy. Sinsmas ruined Stolas as a character, stripping him of all the development he has had over the entire season, reducing him into the very thing he claimed not to be, and what makes it worse that throughout all of it, he was enabled to act this way by another character who was characteristically assassinated just as bad as Stolas was. When it comes to his relationship with Stolas, Blitz's arc has been learning to trust him and to leave behind any predetermined notions he had of him just because he was royalty. He thought Stolas was just using him, looking down on him, treating him as an object for his own entertainment, and as we know, Blitz was wrong. Was. Past tense. Blitz was wrong before Sinsmas, but now Blitz has turned into the very thing he never wanted to be. A servant to Stolas. Hell of a Boss has always had this undertone of classism when it comes to imp kind, and this undertone has heavily influenced the way Blitz has viewed Stolas. There were of course other elements at play, with Blitz having abandonment issues and a guilty conscience, but if there has been one thing that season 2 has really focused on when it comes to how Blitz views Stolas, it's the divide between these two when it comes to their social classes. Blitz fears becoming subservient to Stolas because doing so would clash with the very principles that led him to finding IMP in the first place. Blitz more than anything wants to be his own free man and to bow down to no one. That is his most important character trait that this entire series revolves around. This is why Blitz, a character who has been defined by his independence and refusal to be looked down upon throughout this entire series, becoming Stolas' lapdog, destroys Blitz as a character to the fundamental level. I understand that Blitz wanted to be loved, and I know that he wants companionship, but with everything we know about Blitz, he would never tolerate the way Stolas acts throughout this episode. As we have already discussed, the way Stolas acts and treats Blitz is everything that Blitz hates about royalty. The real Blitz would never, ever tolerate the way Stolas treats him throughout this episode, and yet whenever I think about Blitz in this entry, the first image that comes to mind is Stolas insulting his cooking and then talking about how high-end his diet is, only for Blitz to be staring at him longingly. I could go on, but I think I have made my point. The way Vivian wrote Blitz in this episode is insulting. I don't care if she's the one who created this character. As a writer, you have the responsibility to respect your own continuity and the characters who you have been developing over the last 5 years, and if you fail to do so, you have not only failed as a writer, but you have failed the fans who watch and support your show. You see, when it came to Stryker and Moxie, they at least had the luxury of being side characters, but Blitz, he is the main character. The show's name is based on him. How do you misunderstand your main character to such an abhorrently bad degree? I wish I could be more positive after that, as a part of me feels as though I'm being unfair to Vivian, but then all I have to do is remember how she wrote Millie. Millie becoming pregnant sounds like something a Vivzipop hater would accuse her of writing as a way to insult her. Pregnancy arcs are almost never good. They are an emergency crutch that writers fall on when they don't know what to do with a female character. The number one complaint about Millie's character is that she is an accessory to Moxie and fails to live up to being her own character because everything she does in the series revolves around her relationship. And Millie being pregnant is writing-wise and literally a product of Moxie and Millie's relationship. We all know that once we get to season 3, Millie's pregnancy isn't going to be about her, it's going to be about Moxie. Even throughout this episode, when she finds out that she's pregnant, what is the first thing that's on her mind? It's how Moxie is going to react to her being pregnant. Millie just found out she's pregnant, and before even thinking about herself, before thinking about her family, her number one concern is Moxie. I have been staunchly against the notion that Vivzipop doesn't know how to write female characters, but there is a point where it's happened so often that it's less of a joke and more of a fact. I just want to pose the question, how does making Millie pregnant make her a better character in her own right? The prospect of motherhood can be extraordinarily nuanced, but it's very hard to be invested in a character becoming a mother when we still barely know anything about her. We have only gotten 2 episodes in this series that explore Millie as a character, both of which weren't written by Vivian, by the way, and we still don't know much about her relationship with her family or her life outside of IMP and being Moxie's wife. And if you have any doubt that in season 3 Millie's pregnancy won't be focused around Moxie, keep in mind this season finale didn't set up anything for Moxie other than Millie's pregnancy, and Crimson is still out there, and if I remember my mobster tropes correctly, they take a massive interest whenever they hear that there is going to be a new addition to the family lineage. Joining Millie for candidate for the worst written female character in the show is once again Stella. Similar to nearly everyone else, the way Stella was handled in this episode was awful, but unlike everyone else, that's less of an exception and more of an expectation. Stella is a non-character. The only hope that there was more to this character all lied in how she interacts with Octavia, and Sinsmas proves that she doesn't care about her at all. That leaves us with an uninteresting, surface-level, irredeemably cruel character who has absolutely nothing going for her writing-wise, beyond her just being a bad person, which, in case anyone has forgotten, this show takes place in hell. So she's probably just as bad as the majority of people in hell, and she only looks as bad in contrast with the rest of the characters, who by hell standards are unusually nice. I truly was rooting for this character to be fleshed out, to be more than just a token bad guy, but like all of Hell of a Boss's villains, she's just about as simple as can be, and as a result, I will feel nothing when she is eventually defeated. Accompanying Stella for the most boring villain in this show is Androphis, once again. And Sinsmas doesn't really give me any material to work with to say anything that I haven't already said about this character. I highly recommend you watch my Western Energy or Mastermind reviews to get a broader idea of what I think of this character, but to keep it short, Androphis is a mistake of a character who took the role Stella should have had in this show, and as a byproduct, both characters become boring because of that. As long as Androphis exists, Stella's existence is narratively meaningless, and as long as Stella exists, Androphis will always feel like an unnecessary addition to the show. He is everything Stella should have been, but due to Stella having more personal stakes in their rivalry with Stolas, he will always feel like an assistant to Stella, who is less interesting than her, but takes a more active role in the series. Moving on, we have one last character to discuss, Octavia. Octavia is the only character who was handled well in this episode. She may not have had much screen time, but her calling out Stolas was probably the most emotionally complex moment Vivian has ever written in this show. I could have done without the inclusion of the antidepressants, but even then it's so cathartic seeing her angry with Stolas for sacrificing his role as a father to save the life of someone who has treated Stolas horribly throughout the entire season. This also addresses the complaint that throughout all of Season 2 Stolas has never been in the wrong and is a misunderstood victim, but that is not the case here. In this instance, Stolas is in the wrong, and the only victim here is Octavia, and the way she treats Stolas is completely justified and deserved. There is a tang of bittersweetness to this moment though, as Stolas losing Octavia has set up an arc for him in Season 3, and after how overabundant this character has been, I truly want to see as little of him as possible, and for the show to go back to focusing more on its premise, but now we are going to have to see more Stolas melodrama, with Octavia being his fixation instead of Blitz. The way Sinsmas handled its characters in this entry was so bad that it made me considerably hate this show as a whole more. If it was just a filler episode like Unhappy Campers, I would be more forgiving, but this was the season finale. It is the most important episode of the season, and the way the characters are written doesn't even feel like fan fiction, because even fan fiction understands these characters better than the series creator did. Stolas and Blitz feel like an alternate reality parody version of themselves who betray their series-long motivations and beliefs. Androphis' existence makes the show worse. Everything that could have been interesting about Stella has been abandoned, leaving her as a one-note caricature who has no role in the series. I am now fully convinced that Millie was a mistake that should have never been written into the series and had her role taken over by Luna. Moxie doesn't do much worth mentioning. Luna has one notable scene that I will discuss later, and Octavia, the saving grace of the characters in this episode, is very hard to appreciate because in the back of my mind, I can't help but feel like she is going to be mishandled in Season 3 because I know Vivian doesn't know how to write moral complexity. Alright, after all that, I think we are overdue for some positivity, because believe it or not, despite everything, there are some good moments within Sinsmas. I really liked the slice of life feel the beginning of this episode had with Blitz and Stolas. Although I think a lot of the drama these two have had over the season was criminally swept under the rug by both these characters, making a season-long arc feel like it never had a proper conclusion, at the same time, I have been past the point of being sick of that arc, and seeing them just casually talk while eating breakfast or going about their daily lives while some chill pop music plays in the background was just pure low-intensity fun, which, as this show has gone on to become more and more melodramatic, is an aspect of Hell of a Boss that I didn't realize I missed so much until these scenes occurred. Following this, Sinsmas continues to deliver on the everyday slice of life elements when we get to see the biggest highlight from Moxie and Millie, where they are play fighting. Not only is it admittedly really adorable, but this might be some of the most organic chemistry we have seen between them throughout this entire show. Although I like Moxie and Millie, they have the very common issue where they are written to always be fawning over each other, and while that isn't necessarily bad writing, it's not all that engaging for any reason other than it being wholesome, because despite us being 2 seasons in the show, we still don't really know why they love each other, and we never see them actually have any fun with each other that doesn't have a flirtatious overtone. It's because of how rarely we see these two just enjoying their time together without them putting such a heavy emphasis on their relationship that their relationship can feel pretty shallow at times, but seeing them play fighting and just having fun together was probably the first moment since Lululand where I could truly believe that these two would make a good couple in a way that didn't feel forced, and although I'm not going to say this singular episode redeemed an entire 2 seasons of their relationship being fairly underdeveloped, it is a small victory for Hell of a Boss, and at this point, I am willing to take whatever I can get. The song of the episode, I Will Be Okay, sung by Octavia, is a fine song, I suppose. I was more impressed by the visuals than the actual song itself, and I do love how it's such a twisted parallel to Stolas' You Will Be Okay from Lululand that takes the moral of that song and applies it against Stolas. Still, the song itself isn't anything special, unless you're an Octavia fan, but I might as well admit that the pre-chorus is extremely catchy, and I wish it had become the refrain. Now, as we shift back into the problems with this episode, I think the final fight is a good place to start, as seemingly all season finales have to have a mandatory climactic fight scene, and Hell of a Boss is not an exception. But before we get to that, we have to talk about what happens right before it. Stolas beating up Androlphus. Yes, this scene was funny. Yes, this scene was cathartic, but at what cost? Androlphus has been fighting an uphill battle this entire season to become a real threat, and right before the final confrontation, we see Stolas, a character who has no combat abilities whatsoever, beating up the primary antagonist of the season for a cheap laugh. This moment represents everything that went wrong with Stryker back in Western Energy, and Sinsmas is repeating that exact same mistake. I already didn't take Androlphus seriously as a character in previous episodes, and this moment proved me right to do so because if the writers aren't going to take the primary villain seriously, why would anyone take the entire fight against that villain seriously? Under normal circumstances, I would have been more excited for this final fight, but with the antagonist being Androlphus and this being Hell of a Boss Season 2, I am glad I listened to my instincts because this final fight lives up to the expectations that only Hell of a Boss Season 2 could set. To begin, there's no real reason to be invested in this fight. The fight choreography isn't impressive, and due to the antagonist being painfully uninteresting and treated like a joke, there is no tension. It also doesn't help that outside of Blitz, the rest of IMP don't really do anything. All Moxie does is throw Blitz a sword, Luna turns into a new wolf form, which, let's all be honest, the only reason this happens is for the exact same reason Luna was the only member of IMP to get a human disguise. It's to sell merch. There's no reason for Luna to have this form, as we have already seen her go full quadruped back in Western Energy without adapting this form. In fact, this new form is more of a hindrance to her abilities more than anything else, as at least when she's in her normal form, she can switch from quadruped to biped without having to take the time to transform, and she could still use her hands to grab things and use weapons, whereas her new form turns her hands into paws. There is literally no functional reason whatsoever for Luna to use this new form, and comes across as nothing more than merchandise bait and cheap shock value. Lastly, we have Millie, and do I even need to say it? If you thought Moxie's utilization in this scene was boring, and if you thought Luna's transformation was stupid, well, Millie is the worst of both worlds. Literally, the first thing that happens in this fight is Millie gets the full Moon Festival treatment where she gets knocked out of action and falls into an armory. Now, I think the first reasonable thought that came to everyone's minds on their first viewing is, oh god, what is Millie going to do with an entire armory at her disposal? And then Sinsmas begins to live up to that expectation by having Millie try using guns, and then what does she do for the rest of the fight, now that she is fully armed and ready to wreak havoc on Androlphus? She fires a single rocket that comes closer to hitting Moxie instead of Androlphus, and that's it. That's all that Millie, the most capable fighter in the main cast, does throughout the entire final battle of the season. Okay, yeah, let's just tell it how it is. This fight sucks. There's little reason to care because Androphis is a boring character, Blitz kinda just gets tossed around a lot, Luna's transformation was shoved in just for the sake of something new happening to artificially generate hype, Millie does nothing, we get this scene.
You've just risked your life to save mine.
Well, so did you.
Which felt like it came straight out of a middle schooler's Wattpad fanfiction, and the fight ends with Octavia using her powers we have never seen before, which are apparently strong enough to instantly overpower Androphis, who, mind you, is a Marquis of Hell. The only redeeming quality about this fight is the music that is playing throughout it, which does succeed in adding an air of epicness to the battle, but even then it doesn't even come close to salvaging Sinsmas' climax. But despite how bad the final battle of Sinsmas was, it doesn't come close to claiming the title for the worst scene in this episode. The worst scene of this episode is so offensively bad that it made every flaw the climax had seem tame and forgettable in comparison. And it all started with the introduction of the client, who I am just going to refer to as Karen. Now, when people die and go to hell, it is because they were bad people when they were alive. But when writing a series that takes place in hell, it's nearly impossible to avoid ethical dilemmas, which are a large appeal of hell as a setting in fiction. And Karen is a character I absolutely despise, not because of her actual character, but because of what she represents and how this show frames good and bad people, which is the most important ethical dilemma when you are writing a series revolving around hell. Karen is the typical person you would find in hell. She's rude, selfish, petty, and discriminatory. The idea of Blitz and the rest of IMP working for people like this should have always been expected, and could have created a reoccurring ethical dilemma instead of this show just cherry-picking the most wholesome of Hell's residents to portray IMP working for. It is worth keeping in mind that the very first official episode of this series began with IMP taking an identical job for Miss Mayberry, except the difference here is that Mayberry was a murderer, making her a far worse person than Karen is. But because Hell of a Boss is so scared of creating any ethical nuance, this show favors portraying characters in a positive light based on their personalities instead of their actions, which robs this show of any ethical or moral exploration. And this all leads to what may be the worst moment in all of Hell of a Boss. The Blitz sparing the couple scene is the ultimate devaluation of the very foundation this show was built on, and I don't think I have hated a moment of this show so much since Moxie got tased back in X's and Ooze. I could forgive it if it was just Blitz who didn't want to kill the couple, as that would show his relationship with Stolas has changed him and would create a rift between him and the rest of IMP, but Moxie, a character who is celebrating Sinsmas by embracing wrath and violence to be against this job, and Millie being the voice of reason and being 100% in the right, having her opinion undermined because she's pregnant, was so unbelievably infuriating that I actually got upset and had to pause the episode the first time I watched Sinsmas to calm myself down. Again, going back to what I said about Karen, she has a horrible personality, but she hasn't done any actions that are truly bad, while her husband cheated on her and he's the one that is framed as deserving to be happy. Portraying a cheater who is living a happy life with the person who he cheated on his late wife with, and then took his late wife's kids when she was gone as sympathetic, is so unbelievably morally twisted in a way that comes off as more disturbing than anything else. Now, I want to make it clear, I actually don't mind there being morally heinous elements in this show. In fact, I wish Hell of a Boss leaned more into how awful the main characters are, but where it crosses the line is when the show is genuinely trying to portray something like this as ethically justifiable. And yes, I am aware of the parallels in this situation when you compare and contrast the cheater to Stolas and Karen to Stella. That is the point. This plotline is the human world equivalent to the entire Stolitz drama. but as you connect the dots, it only further makes you realize how horribly Stella has been written, as although she is cruel like Karen, it is completely unfair for Vivian to take characters like Blitz, Stolas, and Verosika, who are all different shades of horrible people, and give them nuance and redeeming characteristics while not giving Stella any. Just like how Karen is framed as an all-around terrible person, while her husband, who cheated on his wife, who he has kids with, gets off scot-free and is portrayed as the innocent one. And this may just be me being a theorist here, but I find it very symbolistic that Blitz at this moment thinks about his future with Stolas instead of doing his job, just like how Hell of a Boss as a show now prioritizes Blitz and Stolas' romance over its original premise of IMP doing their job. Meanwhile, there's Millie, a character who has basically nothing going for her in this series, could have in this moment noticed that Blitz's newfound sympathy after getting into a relationship with Stolas is jeopardizing his responsibilities as the boss of IMP, setting up a conflict between her and Blitz in season 3, but instead, all we get is Millie being disregarded and her being fine with it because she's having mood swings due to her pregnancy. I don't know what's worse, the fact that Sinsmas is both metaphorically and literally throwing away the premise of this series all for the sake of Stolitz, the episode intentionally manipulating the viewer so they perceive the cheater who takes his dead wife's children against her will as an innocent person, or that there was an opportunity to create an interesting arc for Millie in season 3 and it was thrown away for no reason. Lastly, there is the ending dance scene, which I just really can't bring myself to care about. I was exhausted by Stolas and Blitz's relationship before Sinsmas, and now with the way Blitz and Stolas have been written, there is no reason to care as any consequences in regards to this relationship get conveniently forgotten, or the characters themselves get changed to serve the ship. The ship is this show's #1 priority now, and if Apology Tour, Mastermind, Moxie and Millie, Asmodeus and Fizzarolli, and this episode have proven anything, it's that Vivian is bad at writing relationships and the drama accompanying them. So yeah, I don't care about the dance scene. It's nothing more than contrived fan service, and if it isn't, I still don't care because Hell of a Boss hasn't given me a reason to care. If anything, with how badly this ship has been written, I am better off not being invested because I know from experience that I will just end up being disappointed. If there's anything to take away from this series' entire second season and Stolitz, it's that this show doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, and all praise it deserves has to be earned in each individual episode in its own right, and not by promising that the events of this show are leading up to something that will make all the mistakes and contrivances this show has worth it in the end. And that is what Sinsmas above all else represents. This episode is the grand payoff we get to an entire season that was so badly written that it's embarrassing for a fan to even admit that they like this show. And now that we have reached the end of this season, I can confidently say that all the mockery and controversy this season has gotten over the years is well deserved. All Sinsmas is the final nail in the coffin. It's proof that every problem season 2 had was not worth it in the end. All the excessive sex jokes, sitcom level melodrama, pointless characters, rushed character arcs, character assassinations, and a narrative that barely follows the premise this show advertised itself to have that made it popular in the first place. 2 years of all of that just so we could have a boring fight scene, a terribly written moral dilemma, the beginning of a pregnancy arc that I don't think anyone wanted, and the complete destruction of who Blitz is as a character, accompanied by a total regression of all the development Stolas has had throughout this series, all in the name of pushing an amateurishly written romance plot that completely disrespects the characters involved and not only makes it difficult to take Vivian Madrano as a writer seriously, but also makes taking the show seriously feel like a chore with no payoff. Of this nearly 30-minute finale, I would say that only about 6.5 minutes of it is worth your time. That being the opening 5 minutes of the episode and the 1.5-minute Octavia versus Stolas scene. But everything else feels shallow, forced, and aimless, with a level of quality that I could only imagine would be disappointing to anyone who isn't obsessed with the Stolitz drama. Sinsmas is by no means the worst episode in this series, but this is the season finale. The expectations and standards should be higher. And as far as a finale goes, one of the few consistent things about it is that, like most of the second season, is that it wastes your time, reduces the overall quality of the series, and further proves that Hell of a Boss, a series once full of promise, interesting characters, and was truly fun and entertaining, is no longer a show worth being invested in.
Treat me like one of your little butler imps!
But it is protein, I suppose.
Fun is free, but we can afford nice things.